You are listening to the Intelligent Vocalist Podcast, episode 106.
Welcome to the Intelligent Vocalist with John Henny. This is the podcast dedicated to help you be a smarter, better, more informed singer. And now, your host for the Intelligent Vocalist, John Henny.
Hey there, this is John Henny. Welcome back to another episode of The Intelligent Vocalist. I do so appreciate you spending your precious listening time with me. Okay, today is part 2 of my interview with Laurel, Irene, and David Harris of Voice Science Works. And part 1 has gotten some pretty good response. Laurel and David have a beautiful way of marrying science and the art of singing and the emotional context of singing. And you really do need to spend some time at their website, Voice Science Works. If you go to johnhenny.com/106 for episode 106, I'll put the link to their site, as well as to a specific page that they get into in this episode, which is the language of vocal registers and understanding vocal registers. And they really do take a beautiful look at how we negotiate these ideas of chest voice and head voice and what they really mean. It's really worth a read. And speaking of science, my own course, The New Science of Singing, is going to be having a update coming up very, very soon. I'm in the midst of recording and editing videos, and I go into some newer scientific concepts that I think are very useful. So if you already have the course, not to worry, you will get those updates automatically, free of charge. I will announce it and they'll be there in the course for you. And if you don't have the course, stay tuned for these major updates. I'm pretty excited. And without further ado, here is part 2 of my interview with Voice Science Works. I am back with Laurel, Irene, and David Harris of Voice Science Works. Thank you again for joining me.
Absolutely. Yes, glad to be back.
So I want to continue this fascinating conversation on voice science, and I have to say that the thing that's really I wouldn't say surprising, but just really pleases me is how much you focus on the neuroscience. And it's not just hard numbers, and it's not just looking at the voice through spectrograms and all of those things, but really understanding how it functions within the singer, because you're both performers, you're both singers, you're both active choir director, etc. So you have your feet in both trenches.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
and
actually teacher, performer, and science.
Yeah, all the time. All the trenches. And that's been a conversation that's really interesting to us lately. Is the number of practitioners that voices their world, and they want to talk about the voice and help with their voices, and we go so deep into this field but have maybe stopped singing themselves or don't find that joy, wouldn't even define themselves as a singer, and that's also not a one definition word, but that's something actually we just even threw up on Facebook a couple weeks ago, and we're really interested in all the responses from fellow practitioners who kind of were just exploring, why don't I sing anymore?
It was very emotional.
Yeah, it's a really emotional conversation.
I felt kind of like I'd been given this gift to walk into these very vulnerable places with many people I knew, some I didn't, kind of around the world, who had intense, crisp stories about, this used to be my world and I quit and here's why. And some said, and now I've been trying to figure out how to walk back into it, and thanked me for asking the question. And some said, I don't know what this means anymore. I have to walk away or I'm going to lose myself, and why, I mean, and many of these people have, we've heard them, we've been blessed by, the gift of their voice. And, and that's kind of what I asked too, is it feels like a burden to me as someone who regularly encourages people to explore their voice, to feel like there's a wall up with these gorgeous gifts that there's no way in. And I know that's a lot of my own psychology, but that's what I was asking. Why? And it is a heavy thing, and that's all in the brain, and it's all in how we process experience and what we went through as vocalists, all that stuff. But it's massive in our community, and to think about is important.
Well, think about it. Once you start teaching, once you say I'm a voice teacher, now suddenly everything that emanates from you, there's an expectation of perfection.
Yeah.
And so, in voice teachers, anytime you're teaching or they get up to sing in front of others, there's almost this apology that they feel they need to teach beforehand.
Yeah.
It's just people, you feel, whether it's in your own head or how true it is, that you're being looked at in a different way, you're being judged in a different way. And it's no longer just expression.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
if it ever was.
Yeah. And I mean, that's like so many auditions to get a collegiate position. You give a 30-minute concert and then a 30-minute masterclass. And to me, that's always looked like the most terrifying combination of like, first I'm going to prove I can do it, and then I can earn the right to tell you that you aren't doing it. But I think the word you use, judgment, is actually the problem. That's kind of the source of all this. Is once you bring it into the room, it could apply to anyone.
Even if it's a positive judgment, even if you're great, is what you say.
Yeah, but if I'm putting that on someone else, it's of course could come back to me, because it doesn't discern. If judgment's there, it can hit any target. I always think of the example of, growing up female with, if your mom or other kind of role model women in your lives start degrading their body shape, it's not about them. It's that you now know, that could hit me at any point. Even if she told me I'm beautiful right now, what if I ever am not this shape? Then, she's introduced these judgment words, and therefore I have to be on the lookout for them at all times. And I think that goes with the way we judge others' voices. And then therefore that judgment could at any point reflect back on ourselves. And of course it does.
And just pausing to take that in, like what Laurel's story, that's really heavy. That being in and around a space where this thing that you identify with, that you love and care about, is constantly under scrutiny in this weighted way.
Yeah.
And that we see that as the portal to progress. Of course it weighs everybody down. And, that's one of the reasons we like the idea of curiosity. And, the scientific method is non-judgmental. It's, I don't know, let's throw it against the wall and see if it sticks in this order.
Yeah.
And that gives us the chance to say, you don't have to be perfect. In fact, perfection doesn't exist. Let's try this. And it's not like it's random, because we're trying this in an ordered fashion and looking for measurables. But that's so much more effacing and refreshing and connecting than just hearing good, bad, ugly all the time. And it's really a deep personal question, not a methodological question. I want to exist in a space where I feel free to explore and where I can be vulnerable in front of people that I'm creating with. And if I want that, then how do I create a space wherein I can trust myself, I can trust others, and they can trust me and each other? That's where it all starts.
Yeah.
And then, all of the things we explore serve that goal and the goal of our own personal desire to see what we can do. I want to be able to do that. I wonder how I get there. Let's start.
And so science is only the tool.
It's the tool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've heard criticisms where someone will say, if you read a science book, that you're not going to learn to sing. It's like, okay, that's true. But what tools are in there that can help me sing, that can help me understand?
And it's that also that, each of those tools, the books, the videos, the lessons, all those tools are also inundated with the same judgment culture. And so it's not that we're not suggesting we get rid of the entire vocal world, but that we acknowledge that we have inherited a world that is steeped in judgment, and that wasn't done maliciously. It makes sense. It was an honest build, because what we had as access was our ears and our conscious mind, and we didn't have a whole lot of other stuff to help guide us. But the voice science revolution, the neuroscience revolution, the sports science and body science revolutions that have occurred in the last 20, 30 years have changed the paradigm for us so that we can practice in a healthy way. And I say that emotionally, physically, mentally healthy way, that allows us to identify with this key element of our identity, which is our voice. And it allows us to take the kind of, that person sings, I don't, off the table. Our voices work. How do you want to coordinate it? And then we can use the tools that we want, recognizing that a lot of those are going to still have that judgment language around them. And we're going to have to read through it. And that's going to be okay, because that's still where we inherited.
It's kind of like that idea of, we threw the dart against the side of the barn and then painted the bullseye around where the dart landed. And so we've had this ideal, and what science does is goes, hey, there's a whole side of the barn here.
Yeah.
The dart can land in other places.
Yes.
And let's see, and with that understanding, how far we can push this. And will this start to cause physical damage? Why is this version of it causing damage and this not? Are there voices that can handle this and other voices that cannot? And it's I think, and that to me, dropping that aspect of judgment, and certainly there are musical styles that have certain aesthetics that you have to maintain, but there are other styles are being invented and opened up all the time.
Yeah.
Well, and going back to the brain, we talk a lot about emotion and the limbic system. That's the emotion center of the brain, and its influence on the voice, because it's direct. And that we had this discussion in Atlanta. No matter what the style is, no matter the era, I think every person on the planet who's paid attention to a voice user, a speaker, an actor, a singer, has seen someone with what you might call perfect technique and been impressed by their technical prowess, but not necessarily moved.
Yeah.
And we've seen someone who is sloppy and, technically all over the place and just couldn't quit crying. And that says something about us, it says something about them. And that's just a reality of the experience. And it's because technique isn't just about coordinating the vocal folds. It's about the whole system, and it's about communication, and it's about sharing. And those things go way deeper than the TA muscle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is good stuff. I'm often struck when I'm teaching. There are times when somebody start working material and they just connect to it in a way that I find myself no longer teaching. Mm-hmm. My brain now is in a completely different place, and I'm just being communicated to.
Yeah.
And it becomes a struggle of I can't start crying behind it.
Right.
This person's paying for my time, but wow.
But you could.
And even with the vocal faults, and maybe there's things that need to be adjusted or they're struggling with, and it's like, man, you're making me feel some kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about exploring different styles of singing and the idea of feeling like authentic in them. Like I'm someone who, if I'm making fun or like playing around with other styles, I actually can sound pretty convincing in them. But if I tell myself, Laurel, you must belt, I like kind of shut down. But if I'm, making fun of someone who's doing a different style than I'm used to, I can physically do it. But so that's telling me that it's not about like my biology cannot sing in this style. It tells me I'm not like really relating to maybe the emotional motivation that goes into the sounds of that style. And so it doesn't feel quote unquote authentic to me in that moment. And so I have to do it in the form of play or pretending to be someone else.
Until you get to a place where you feel like, okay, now Now I'm starting to understand why this sound makes sense.
Yeah.
Playing with it at first gives us a space to kind of be silly until it starts to make sense to us emotionally and physically.
Yeah. But just that idea of, the motivation that got people into making those sounds has to be a part of it. Or else you are just, it's not just the physical coordination, as I said.
And I just read, again, The Body Keeps Score, and felt really vindicated because Laurel and I, one of the things we do a lot of time is after, some singing happens, we'll ask people to breathe and just notice their breath for a second before we start talking. And then ask, what did you notice? And Vanderkolk says, in therapy, there are really two questions. What did you notice? And where will you take that? And I thought, that's the voice world. That's the voice world I want to live in. What did you notice? And what are you going to do with it? And because that, then it's off of us. And you can cry all you want. And you can show that vulnerability and that emotion and say, right there in that moment, I was so moved. Thank you for that. What did you notice? And after they respond, say, what are we going to do with that? How are we going to see if that can happen again? And if they say, well, when I noticed a lot of people say, well, I really didn't hit that high note. Say, okay, we noticed that. What else? And let that be part of a larger conversation and then loop back around to it. Let's play with something that might help with that high note for next time. But we don't want to lose that emotional thing that you saw by drilling the F sharp over and over again.
Right. So taking this idea of people who are stressing out, they're thinking about their goals, career, what they want to achieve, their lessons, trying to understand the science, but that idea of it has to stay fun.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be joy within that. Mm-hmm. I love that. Jumping over to voice terminology. Mm-hmm. And just one of a quote I love that I kind of paraphrase is Frank Zappa, and he said, "Writing about music is like dancing about architecture."
Yeah,
and I find that within teaching voice and discussing voice, vocal terms, and just the debate, even just words like belt or words like mix, mm-hmm. or it means different things to different people, and Where do you see this going to where, now we start to have scientific terms of, M1, M2 replacing such terms as chest and head and where do you think this is all going to land so that we can all communicate more effectively?
I think, it's a topic we've been discussing a lot actually. And again, I think the first step is to not use new information to validate an old way of thinking. So now we're like, well, I've got these new words. Yeah, M1, M2, TA dominant, CT dominant. I will now just copy and paste them over my concepts of head and chest. And I've now progressed. But there was a problem with head and chest that wasn't the words. It was the way of thinking that got us into a place where we believe that there's only two timbres that exist in the voice. And that it exists on this line. And if I'm more head, I'm less chest. And it's either or. And if something comes along, it must exist upon this invisible line that I've created between these two concepts of timbre.
Except there's an escape bubble that we'll call mix, but that's everything else. Let's go back to hidden chest.
Yeah. So I'm less interested in the word itself, but what kind of belief or thinking does that word imply? And to me, so many of the words that we have inherited around the voice imply polarity and either or. And when we actually look at sound, we see that sound is both and. Sound is both dark and bright at the same time. It's loud and soft. It's forward and back. Any polarity word you come up with that we've used to describe the voice, they're all existing at once. And so no matter if we're using new scientific terms, if they fit into that old paradigm of I have to check a box, it's this or that, and then that's the only thing I'm ever going to listen for, and therefore the only thing I'm ever going to be able to kind of create, if I'm only listening for this or that, I can't actually ever hear the full complexity. That's kind of the conversation I'd want to address first, besides rather than, what are we going to call it? What even is it?
Well, and we actually it took us when Laurel and I first met, we were in Salt Lake City working with Ingo Tietze at the National Center for Voice and Speech. And within a couple of days, we had a conversation about creating a website, the website that eventually became Voice Science Works. And the first thing I was excited about was this question. How do we let the world kind of open into the idea of, head voice and chest voice don't have to exist necessarily. And if they do, they don't have to have the weight that they do. But it took us 4 years to actually write the page because we kept bumping up into something that sounded punitive and that sounded like we were attacking people's language choices, which is
it's personal. Yeah,
it is. It's really personal, and people have language, and it's important because that's what has allowed us, as Stephen Hawking said, to evolve much faster than our DNA. Is our ability to communicate with language. And it's massive.
For better or worse.
For better or worse. But what our page said, and we actually, the page is more about language than anything, but we use vocal registration as a metaphor. We use the metaphor of vocal registration as a conduit to discuss language. And one of the parts of that page is addresses the idea of TDP and CDP, which are, I think I put that acronym in the wrong order, but you get the idea. It's just another, like M1, M2, whatever, another acronym to replace head voice, chest voice. And what we've heard.
We should probably explain what M1 and M2
okay, sure.
quickly for listeners, since I threw it out there without any context.
Go for it.
Oh, I was going to let you.
Oh, okay, sure. So, since advanced laryngoscopy and work of people like Tietze and Brad Story have advanced to a level that we all kind of have access to it, people started to realize that there was a moment in vocalizing when more of the vocal folds were in contact, and a moment in vocalizing when less of the vocal folds were in contact. That's kind of the simplest way to talk about it. And there had already been an understanding, or the metaphor of head voice and chest voice existed, and chest voice carried connotations of heavier, weightier, thicker, this kind of thing. And head voice was lighter, floatier, those kind of things. And so when we could see with the laryngoscopy that there's more, the vocal folds actually look thicker in what we would call chest voice, and they actually look thinner in what we would call head voice, people are like, yeah, that's it. That does it. Well, then some people are like, yeah, but there's got to be more there. We understand this registration thing is important, but we need to call it something more scientific so we can really get to the heart of it. So then they started replacing head voice, chest voice with things that sounded scientific, like mode. Again, you can read through, we actually go through a history of that on that page. So basically it's scientific, like what Laurel was saying, scientific replacement of an old metaphor with a new scientific term is what kind of happened.
Which makes sense, but from the researcher's standpoint, because they can't use term chest and head that can refer to either the folds, but is it more the acoustics or is it the singer sensation? Like, what does it mean? Yeah.
And to Laurel's point, one of the things that I find most fascinating, a very new research document was put out, I think last year, maybe a couple of years ago. That plus the document that I mentioned in our last session together, the Story and Soren article, showed that actually the way we've noticed most people using the CT and TA idea, mode 1, mode 2, is that when the TA muscle, which is the muscle that thickens and shortens the vocal folds, when it's engaged, the CT muscle is unengaged. That's how people tend to have thought about it, we've noticed. Kind of like they think of it like a bicep, tricep. Using your bicep, your triceps relax. Using your tricep, your biceps relax. But with the CTTA antagonism, it's constant. It's going back and forth all the time. And what this one researcher discovered is that actually the CT muscle is more engaged for almost all vocalizations than the TA muscle. There's just more of it in play at all times. And so just like what I was saying, the binary.
So we've been on the very lowest notes.
We've been on there every now and again, you'll get more TA. But, and then there are times like at the bottom of your range, what Story, and I emailed Brad to ask him, It's like, am I reading your research right? That there are times when CT and TA kind of quit. And he said, yeah. And you can still keep phonating down below that, but you're using the arytenoid muscles and other coordinations because that antagonism doesn't function like that at some point. So,
and for the listener, just so they know, so the TA muscle is the muscle within the folds themselves. They shorten and thicken and make them fatter. And then the CT are the ones that thin and stretch.
And they're outside of the voice box.
Right. Yeah.
And it's miraculous that stuff happens anyway. But I guess to the point of language,
it's so complex. Yeah. The muscle interaction is complex, even if you kind of simplify it as a visual for yourself, but then you read more research about what it's actually doing and realize, wow, it's not a 50-50 trade-off and then 70-30. Like everything's doing everything all at once. And it's just amazing that it stretches and thickens the vocal folds into different configurations that we can sing, 5+ octaves and 6 different genres and then all these crazy sounds. Like it just, when I listen to someone's voice and play around with all the sounds I can make, there are not 2 boxes and there's not 2 categories and there's not even 2 muscle groups. There's 5. So the fact that with this new information, we're still wanting to fit it into the 2 categories, that tells me that we're stuck on that idea and we're not actually listening to all the sound possibilities. And we're not actually looking at all the muscular and acoustic combinations that there are, because there's just not 2.
But to go back to a question you had before, which was, or a statement I think you made, about what do you pay attention to? If we just rob people of their language, we leave them incredibly vulnerable and afraid because and confused. Yeah. So, we're not just taking language away, but what Laurel's saying is we look for ways to create experiences so that people can do something that we can ask the question, what did you notice? They can talk about that. If we want to guide them toward noticing other things, like with listening, focusing on certain harmonics, etc., then we let them give that language. We give language to that experience so that they have terminology that makes sense to them. And if it happens to be something that's more traditional, then we'll just talk about, what all does that mean to you? If they say, well, that was my chest voice. Okay, what does that mean to you? Because that's a pretty broad term and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And if it's a new term, oh, that was like my bubblegum sound. Cool. Can you describe that a little more? Just so that we understand it and we can use it with them. And that helps people to start to recognize that language isn't an iron box that you can't get out of, but it's a tool that we can develop and craft and even let go. There are words that we used to use we don't use anymore. That's okay.
Yeah.
So talking about research and where it's going, what I find fascinating is when I was first looking into vocal science, and I mainly work with contemporary singers, contemporary music. All the research seemed to be on classical singing. So especially for female singers, and I'm looking into more intense contemporary styles, or you're looking into screaming, there was really nothing. That seems to be changing in a really good way. So where do you see the research just continuing to open up to more and more styles and types of singing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really helping the medical field too, because I think the word healthy has been kind of co-opted by a single style, which would be Western classical, and that often the aesthetic preference that goes with that is just said, that's good technique, that's healthy, that's how you preserve your voice. So I think definitely opening up that word and kind of the rubric maybe the medical field would use for quote unquote healthy is very helpful. And I think too, just with music in general, so much genre bending and combining, and that there's not just one aesthetic for jazz or opera, or there's new contemporary classical opera music is something we're very interested in as composers and as performers, and that's all about combining lots of different sounds. There's no longer just one aesthetic that is looked for. So I think the research and the science is kind of following those trends as well.
And I would say historically speaking, it was voice science that really opened the door for contemporary vocal instruction to even exist. I mean,
to give some validity.
Yeah. It is true that much of the research still coming out of academic institutions is still focused on classical singing because there's still a tradition there. But as you notice, there are institutions that are dedicating resources toward what other sounds can happen. There are, plenty of belting studies. There are, and a lot of that came because, in the 80s when, once Ingo and others put out pictures of the vocal folds and said, here are the mechanics, this is what's happening. People like Joe Estill and Seth Riggs and Gina Levitri and, who were all like looking for a way to say, well, I know this stuff works, all of a sudden had a little bit of science to stand on, and they just took it to the bank. And that opened the world to what was already a massive industry, but it made it more valid in the academic world and kind of leveled a playing field that had been stacked against contemporary vocalists since, long before recording existed. So, and there were lots of sociological things that kind of work into that. But I see voice science as historically, it's a space where the opportunity for making different sounds really opened to more people who are interested in applying it. And I think we've just seen that continue to grow. And people like ourselves and like yourself who say, yeah, the sounds are out there. Let's go find them for you if you want them. And then other people who specialize just in making one sound and, but who are acknowledging this is the sound that I make and this is the sound that I teach maybe. And I'll hook you up with a friend who does this other thing if you want to learn that. That exists a lot too. But just that dialogue feels like a very different world than the one I grew up in.
Yeah,
I agree. I was just talking on a previous podcast about the conference I spoke at, but it seems to be now the idea of science, and science seems to be, it's like Switzerland for voice teachers, where the camps can kind of come to this neutral, non-judgmental place where there just exists knowledge as we currently understand it. And then just, okay, so how do I fit in with that? And how do you? And then it's no longer defending my term or defending my technique or style or that's unhealthy. Yeah. It's just, there's something new happening.
Yeah.
And there's something happening, even though you still see the squabbles on the voice teacher forums, etc. But I also think that's just passionate people, that really want to help others and come from a good place, but they're very, we're performers. We're excitable.
Yeah.
and yeah, the forum of Facebook comments is,
excitable.
Right. For misunderstanding.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole nother thing about neuroscience and social media and the hacking of the brain and just the horrible stuff that's going on there. That's for another day.
Yes.
I want to thank you both so much for coming on. Is there anything that you would like my listeners to go check out? Any workshops you have upcoming? Or I know we talked about your, is it
Listen Up.
The Listen Up package, you can email us directly about that. VoiceScienceWorks.org is our site with tons of resources, articles, videos. One big goal is just to drive people to all the other resources out there. We got a whole section on who else is doing what, other conferences, courses across the world, and then all of the free information that we're constantly updating.
We do what we call a voice science crash course. We do it in the fall. A couple times a year. We'll do it in the fall where we...
Yeah, you do those live, right?
Video plus live,
Yeah.
Then do a lot of the work. It's reverse classroom. And then we do live sessions where we play with it and kind of get into a lot of the things we've talked about in this podcast.
So people should get on your mailing list then.
Absolutely.
If they want to see that. We do a curated newsletter once a month. Laurel does an amazing job kind of saying what are the new hot things in voice science. It's really beautiful to look at and fun to click through.
And then if you want to come sing in LA, we're putting on a 10-day festival that's really focused around making and creating new music on top of exploring these topics. It's called the Neo Voice Festival, New Explorative Oratorio. And so it's for composers and vocalists, and the composers are all coming and they're writing a new movement of a mass work, an oratorio. And we're going to explore what it's like to, do quote unquote extended techniques and explore these new genres of music, working with composers, working with creativity, and then how to apply voice science as a singer and then as a composer.
And you also just get to hang out with like-minded
yes, and meet
people.
This international community that's all going to be in LA in August. Yeah.
And they are all awesome people. So it's going to be a good time.
Yeah.
That sounds wonderful. All right. Well, thank you again.
Great.
Thank you, John. Always a pleasure.
If you find this podcast helpful, I'd love for you to help spread the word. Share it with your friends, share it on social media. Just get out there and talk about it. I love seeing the audience grow. I love getting this information out there. You can also review it on wherever you subscribe, iTunes, Stitcher, etc. And until next time, to better singing. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.